On the wet asphalt of a grey morning, a mother walks with her baby in her arms to a forgotten manhole at the end of the street. Inside the rusty grate, a mud-covered German shepherd moves with difficulty. Silently, she holds her son close to the hole, listening to the faint bark. A neighbor watches from a distance, clutching an old blanket in his hands. Without speaking, the man leans an iron bar on the lid, preparing to open it. The baby reaches out its hands, babbling to the hidden. Dog, the lid creaks, the manhole shakes, the city holds its breath. But what happens next? Do you love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thank you for following us. Now, back to our story. Sarah Mitchell had walked this same quiet street in Millbrook, Ohio for 37 years. The row of modest houses with their tidy front yards and white picket fences had become as familiar to her as the lines on her weathered hands. Each morning, she would bundle up her 14-month-old grandson Tyler in his stroller and take their ritual walk around the neighborhood, enjoying the peaceful rhythm of small-town life where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest excitement was usually Mrs. Peterson's prize-winning roses blooming each spring. But on this particular humid Tuesday morning in late September, something felt different. The air hung heavy with the promise of rain, and the leaves on the maple trees were just beginning to hint at autumn colors. Tyler, usually content to babble and point at passing birds, had grown unusually fussy as they approached the corner of Elm and 3rd Street. His tiny hands gripped the edge of his stroller, and his bright blue eyes seemed focused on something Sarah couldn't see. She slowed her pace, instinctively following her grandson's gaze toward the old storm drain that sat flush with the sidewalk. It was one of those forgotten pieces of municipal infrastructure that everyone simply walked past without a second thought. A heavy iron grate covering what she assumed was just another connection to the city's drainage system. Nothing remarkable about it, nothing that should capture a toddler's attention so completely. Yet Tyler's behavior was unmistakable. He was pointing now, his chubby finger extended toward the drain, making soft cooing sounds that seemed almost urgent. Sarah knelt beside the stroller, trying to see what had captured his interest. The morning was still quiet, with only the distant hum of traffic from Main Street and the occasional chirp of sparrows in the nearby oak trees. That's when she heard it. At first, it was so faint she thought it might be her imagination, a muffled sound coming from somewhere beneath her feet. She pressed her ear closer to the grate, feeling slightly foolish, but Tyler's continued agitation convinced her to investigate further. The sound came again, clearer this time. A soft whimper, almost like crying, but not quite human. Sarah straightened, up, her heart beginning to race. She looked around the empty street, half expecting to see someone who could explain what she was hearing. But Elm Street remained deserted except for the mailman, Charlie Dawson, making his rounds 3 blocks away. She glanced down at Tyler, who had grown quiet but continued to stare at the drain with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. The sound came again, and this time there was no mistaking it. It was definitely coming from beneath the storm drain, and it sounded like an animal in distress. A dog, perhaps, though how any animal could have gotten down there was beyond her understanding. The opening between the iron bars was far too narrow for anything larger than a cat to slip through, and the gaps seemed to lead straight down into darkness. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching weather. She had lived in Millbrook her entire life, raised 3 children here, and thought she knew every corner of this sleepy community. The idea that someone might be trapped beneath their feet on this ordinary residential street seemed impossible, like something out of a nightmare rather than her peaceful morning routine. She pulled out her cell phone, thinking she should call someone, but hesitated. Who would she call? What would she say? That she heard strange noises coming from a storm drain. They would think she was losing her mind. Just another elderly woman letting her imagination get the better of her. Besides, the sound had stopped again, and now she was beginning to doubt what she had heard. Tyler began to fuss again, his small voice rising in what Sarah had learned to recognize as his "something's wrong" cry. It was different from his hungry cry or his tired cry. This was the sound he made when thunderstorms approached, or when strangers got too close, or when he sensed something that made him uneasy. Sarah had always marveled at how sensitive children could be to things adults missed. Entirely, she decided to continue their walk, but made a mental note to mention what she had heard to her daughter Emma when she returned Tyler to his mother's house later that morning. Emma was practical and level-headed, working as a nurse at Millbrook General Hospital. If anyone would know what to do about a potentially trapped animal, it would be her daughter. As they moved away from the corner, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She turned back once to look at the storm drain, and for just a moment she could have sworn she saw something glinting in the darkness between the iron bars. But when she blinked and looked again, there was nothing but shadows. The rest of their walk passed without incident, though Tyler remained unusually quiet and kept turning in his stroller to look back toward Elm Street. Sarah found herself distracted, barely noticing Mrs. Chen watering her garden or Mr. Rodriguez washing his truck in the driveway. Her mind kept returning to that sound, that desperate whimper that seemed to echo with a pain she couldn't quite identify. When they returned to Emma's house on Maple Avenue, Sarah found her daughter in the kitchen, preparing for her shift at the hospital. Emma looked tired. She'd been working double shifts lately to cover for a colleague who was on medical leave, but she always brightened when she saw Tyler. Emma noticed her mother's distracted expression immediately. She had inherited Sarah's intuitive nature, along with her auburn hair and green eyes, and could usually read her mother's moods without difficulty. "Something's bothering you, Mom," Emma said, lifting Tyler from his stroller and settling him in his high chair. "You have that worried look you get when you're trying to decide whether to say something or keep it to yourself." Sarah hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. "I probably sound crazy, but I think there might be an animal trapped in the storm drain at the corner of Elm and 3rd. Tyler seemed to hear it too. He got very upset when we walked past there." Emma raised an eyebrow. "What kind of animal?" "I'm not sure. It sounded like a dog, maybe, but I can't figure out how anything could have gotten down there. The grate is too narrow, and it must be pretty deep." Emma considered this while she warmed Tyler's bottle. Her medical training had taught her to take unusual symptoms seriously, even when they seemed unlikely. If her mother said she heard something, then she probably had. "Maybe I should take a look when I get home tonight," Emma said, "or we could call animal control. They would know what to do if there really is something down there." Tyler began to babble excitedly, reaching toward the window that faced in the direction of Elm Street. Both women looked at him, then at each other. There was something in the baby's behavior that convinced them both that Sarah hadn't imagined the sounds. "I have to get to work," Emma said, kissing Tyler's forehead. "But promise me you won't go back there alone, okay? If there is an animal trapped down there, it might be injured and scared. Scared animals can be unpredictable." Sarah nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was beneath that storm drain needed help urgently. As she watched Emma gather her things and head out to her car, she made a decision. She would go back to Elm Street that afternoon, but this time she wouldn't go alone. She would ask her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, to come with her. Margaret Henderson might be opinionated and sometimes difficult, but she was also practical and unafraid to speak her mind. If there was something that needed to be addressed, Margaret would know how to handle it. As Sarah settled in to babysit Tyler for the day, she couldn't stop thinking about that desperate sound and the way her grandson had reacted to it. Whatever was happening at the corner of Elm and 3rd Street, she was certain it was just the beginning of something that would change their quiet neighborhood forever. Outside, the clouds continued to gather, and the first drops of rain began to fall against the windows. Emma's 12-hour shift at Millbrook General had been particularly exhausting. 3 emergency admissions, 2 difficult patients, and a minor crisis in the pediatric ward had left her drained and eager to get home to Tyler. But as she drove through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, her mother's words kept echoing in her mind. An animal trapped in a storm drain seemed improbable, yet she couldn't dismiss the genuine concern she had seen in Sarah's eyes, or the way Tyler had behaved that morning. Instead of driving straight home, Emma found herself turning onto Elm Street. The rain that had threatened all day was finally beginning in earnest, creating small rivers along the gutters and making the pavement shine under the streetlights. She parked near the corner of 3rd Street and stepped out of her Honda Civic, pulling her jacket hood up against the drizzle. The storm drain looked exactly as it always had, an unremarkable iron grate set into the sidewalk, designed to handle runoff from the frequent Ohio thunderstorms. Emma approached it cautiously, feeling somewhat foolish but unable to shake her curiosity. She knelt beside the grate, trying to peer through the iron bars into the darkness below. At first, she heard nothing but the sound of water beginning to trickle through the drain. The rain was picking up, and she was about to give up and return to her car when she heard it, a faint whimpering sound that made her blood run cold. It was definitely coming from beneath the street, and it was definitely an animal in distress. Emma's medical training kicked in immediately. Whatever was down there was suffering, and every moment of delay could make the situation worse. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, directing the beam through the grate. The light didn't penetrate very far into the darkness, but she could make out what appeared to be a concrete tunnel or chamber about 8 feet below street level. The whimpering came again, clearer now, and Emma was certain it was a dog. The sound was weak and raspy, suggesting the animal had been trapped for some time and was likely dehydrated. She tried calling down through the grate, making soft, encouraging sounds, but the only response was a fearful silence. As she knelt there in the rain, Emma became aware that she was no longer alone. She looked up to see Margaret Henderson approaching from across the street, her grey hair covered by a plastic rain bonnet and her expression set in its characteristic lines of disapproval. "Emma Mitchell, what in heaven's name are you doing out here in the rain, crouched over a storm drain like some kind of detective?" Margaret's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 40 years as a high school principal before retiring to Millbrook. Emma stood up, brushing water from her knees. "Mrs. Henderson, I think there's a dog trapped down there. My mother heard it this morning and I can hear it too. It sounds like it's been there for a while." Margaret's expression shifted from annoyance to skepticism. A dog? How would a dog get into a storm drain? These grates are too narrow for anything larger than a rat to fall through. "I don't know how it got there," Emma replied, her patience wearing thin after her long day. "But I'm certain there's an animal down there and it needs help." Margaret approached the grate with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had learned to be cautious about accepting other people's claims without evidence. She listened for nearly a minute before she heard the faint whimpering that had convinced Emma. Her expression changed again, this time to grudging concern. "Well, I suppose there is something down there," Margaret admitted. "But that doesn't mean we should go rushing into some half-baked rescue operation. This drain connects to the old tunnel system that runs under this part of town. If we start messing around with city infrastructure without proper authorization, we could end up causing more problems than we solve." Emma felt a surge of frustration. "So what do you suggest? That we just leave whatever's down there to suffer?" "I suggest we call the proper authorities Animal control, the city works department, maybe even the fire department if it's truly an emergency. But running off half-cocked with some amateur rescue attempt is just asking for trouble. The two women stood in the increasing rain, staring at each other across a philosophical divide that reflected deeper tensions in the Millbrook community. Emma represented the younger generation, quick to act, trusting in individual initiative, impatient with bureaucracy. Margaret embodied the older, more established residents who valued procedure, hierarchy, and the proven ways of doing things. Their standoff was interrupted by the appearance of a man Emma didn't recognize. He was tall and lean, probably in his 40s, wearing a dark windbreaker and jeans. He approached them with the confident stride of someone who belonged in the neighborhood, though Emma was certain she had never seen him before. "Excuse me, ladies," the stranger said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "I couldn't help. But notice you're both very interested in this particular storm drain. Is there some kind of problem?" Margaret immediately went into defensive mode. "And you are?" The man smiled, extending his hand. "Mark Caldwell. I just moved into the rental house on Oak Street last month. I was out for an evening walk when I noticed you two looking concerned about something." Emma found herself oddly uncomfortable with the man's presence, though she couldn't put her finger on why. There was something about his too ready smile and the way his eyes kept darting to the storm drain that made her cautious. "We think there might be an animal trapped down there," Emma said carefully. "We're trying to decide what to do about it." Mark's expression changed subtly, and Emma caught a flash of something. Recognition? Concern? Before, he managed to control his features. "An animal, you say? What kind of animal?" "It sounds like a dog," Emma replied, watching his face closely. "Have you heard anything like that in the neighborhood?" Mark shook his head, but Emma noticed his hands had clenched into fists. "Can't say I have. But if there is a dog down there, you're right to be concerned. These old drainage systems can be dangerous. A lot of things can happen down there that people up here might never know about." There was something ominous in the way he said this that made both women uncomfortable. Margaret, despite her usual directness, seemed to sense that this conversation was moving into territory she didn't want to explore. "Well, regardless of who heard what," Margaret said firmly, "the proper thing to do is contact the authorities and let them handle it. We're not equipped to deal with this kind of situation ourselves." Mark nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely right. These things should be left to the professionals. No point in ordinary citizens getting involved in something that might be more complicated than it appears." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. There was something in Mark Caldwell's eagerness to discourage their involvement that set off alarm bells in her mind. She made a mental note to ask around the neighborhood about this newcomer and his sudden appearance at exactly the moment when they had discovered the trapped animal. As if sensing her suspicion, Mark began to back away. "Well, I hope you ladies figure out the best way to handle this. I'm sure whatever's down there will be fine until the proper authorities can take care of it. Good evening." He walked away with the same confident stride, but Emma noticed he kept glancing back over his shoulder until he disappeared around the corner onto Oak Street. The whole encounter had taken less than 5 minutes, but it left both women feeling unsettled in ways they couldn't quite articulate. The rain was falling harder now, and the sound of water rushing through the storm drain was becoming more prominent. Beneath it, though, Emma could still hear the faint whimpering of the trapped animal. The sound seemed weaker now, more desperate, and she felt a growing sense of urgency that Margaret's bureaucratic caution couldn't quell. "Mrs. Henderson," Emma said firmly, "I understand your concerns about proper procedure. But that animal is suffering right now, and every hour we delay could make the difference between life and a bad outcome. I'm going to call animal control tonight, but if they can't respond immediately, I'm going to find another way to help." Margaret studied Emma's determined expression and seemed to recognize something of her own younger self in the nurse's stubborn compassion. After a moment, she sighed heavily. "If you're determined to pursue this foolishness," Margaret said, "then I suppose someone with sense should keep an eye on you. But we do this properly, do you understand? No cowboys, no dramatics, and no unnecessary risks." Emma smiled for the first time that evening. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I promise we'll be careful." As they walked back to their cars, both women were unaware that Mark Caldwell was watching them from the shadows near Oak Street, his expression troubled and his phone pressed to his ear. The conversation he was having was brief and conducted in whispers, but his agitation was clear even from a distance. The game had begun, though none of the players yet understood the rules or the stakes involved. The next morning brought no relief from the rain, and Emma's frustration had reached a boiling point. She had spent the previous evening making phone calls to every city department she could think of, only to be transferred from one voicemail system to another. Animal control was understaffed and couldn't promise a response for at least 72 hours. The City Works Department insisted that storm drains were outside their jurisdiction unless there was flooding involved. Even the non-emergency police line had been less than helpful, suggesting she file a report online and wait for a callback. Emma sat at her kitchen table, watching Tyler play with his blocks, while she sipped her second cup of coffee and tried to decide what to do next. The baby seemed unusually fussy, constantly looking toward the window that faced Elm Street and making soft, worried sounds that broke Emma's heart. It was as if he could sense the suffering of the trapped animal even from this distance. Her mother had called twice already, reporting that she had walked past the storm drain on her morning routine and could still hear the whimpering, though it seemed fainter than before. The rain was making everything worse, potentially raising the water level in whatever space the animal was trapped in. Emma knew that time was running out, and bureaucratic delays might cost a life. She was still wrestling with her options when there was a knock at her front door. Emma opened it to find Jake Morrison standing on her porch, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. Jake lived 3 houses down on Maple Avenue and was known throughout the neighborhood as a quiet, solitary man who kept to himself. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at the local electric company and was often seen coming and going at odd hours, but he rarely spoke to his neighbors beyond a polite nod. Emma was surprised to see him, especially given the early hour and the rain. Jake was probably in his mid-30s, with sandy brown hair and the kind of weathered hands that spoke of years of manual labor. He had a reputation for being reliable but distant, the kind of neighbor you could count on in an emergency, but who never lingered for small talk. "Miss Mitchell?" Jake's voice was tentative, as if he wasn't sure he should be there. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I heard from Mrs. Henderson that you might be dealing with some kind of situation involving the storm drain on Elm Street." Emma invited him in, curious about what had prompted this unusual visit. Jake had never been inside her house before, and he seemed uncomfortable as he stood in her living room, his work boots still damp from the rain. "I know this might sound strange," Jake continued, "but I think I might be able to help. I've worked with the city's utility systems for about 8 years now, and I'm familiar with the old tunnel network under this part of town. If there really is an animal trapped down there, I might know a way to reach it without having to wait for official approval." Emma felt a surge of hope mixed with caution. Jake Morrison had always seemed trustworthy, but the events of the previous evening had made her wary of strangers offering help. Still, Tyler seemed to calm down in Jake's presence, which Emma had learned to trust as a good sign. "What kind of tunnel network?" Emma asked. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned something about old infrastructure, but I've lived here for 3 years and never heard anything about tunnels." Jake glanced around, as if making sure they weren't being overheard. This whole area was developed. In the 1940s, right after the war, the original builders installed an extensive drainage and utility tunnel system that was supposed to serve the entire neighborhood. Most of it was abandoned when the city upgraded to modern systems in the 1980s, but the tunnels are still there. The storm drain you're dealing with is probably an access point to that old network. Emma felt her pulse quicken. If Jake was right, then the trapped animal might be in a much larger space than she had imagined, which could be either good news or bad news, depending on the circumstances. "How do you know all this?" Emma asked. Jake looked uncomfortable again. "I've had to do emergency repairs down there a few times when underground cables get damaged. It's not something the city likes to advertise because of liability issues, but those tunnels run under most of this neighborhood. Some of them are in pretty bad shape, which is why civilians aren't supposed to access them." Emma processed this information while Tyler continued to play, occasionally looking up at Jake with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved. For people he found particularly interesting, there was something about Jake's manner that suggested he was being completely honest, but that he was also holding something back. "So you think you could get down there and check on whatever animal is trapped?" Emma asked. Jake nodded slowly. "I have the equipment and the experience, but I want to be clear about something. If we do this, we're taking responsibility for whatever we find down there. And there might be more to this situation than just a trapped animal." Emma felt a chill. "What do you mean?" Jake hesitated, clearly wrestling with how much to reveal. "Last night, after Mrs. Henderson mentioned what you two had discovered, I took a walk past that storm drain. I didn't hear any animal sounds, but I did notice something else. There were some items scattered around the grate that seemed out of place." "What kind of items?" "Children's toys, small ones, like they might have been dropped or left there recently. And they were dirty, like they'd been outside for a while, but not weathered enough to have been there for months." Emma felt her stomach drop. Children's toys near a storm drain where an animal was trapped created implications she didn't want to consider. Tyler suddenly stopped playing and looked directly at Jake, making a soft cooing sound that seemed almost urgent. Jake seemed to understand the baby's reaction. "I think your son might be more sensitive to whatever's happening than the rest of us," Jake said quietly. "Some kids are like that. They pick up on things adults miss." Emma sank into her chair, trying to process this new information. Children's toys? A trapped animal? A mysterious newcomer who seemed overly interested in discouraging rescue efforts, and now Jake suggesting there was more to the situation than appeared on the surface. The pieces didn't form a clear picture yet, but they definitely suggested something more complex than a simple animal rescue. "Jake," Emma said carefully, "what exactly do you think is going on here?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window toward Elm Street. "I think someone wanted that animal to be found. The storm drain grate shows signs of recent tampering, scratches around the edges that suggest it was lifted and replaced recently, and the toys, they're positioned too carefully to have been dropped accidentally." Emma felt a cold certainty settling in her chest. "Someone deliberately put an animal down there?" Jake shook his head. "I don't think so. I think someone put an animal down there as a way of drawing attention to something else. Something they wanted people to discover but couldn't reveal directly." The implications of this possibility made Emma's head spin. If Jake was right, then they weren't dealing with a simple case of animal abandonment. They were being manipulated into uncovering something that someone else wanted them to find but couldn't expose themselves. Tyler suddenly started crying, not his usual fussy cry, but the desperate wail he made when he was truly upset about something. Emma picked him up, trying to comfort him, but he continued to sob and point toward the window. It was as if he could sense the growing complexity and danger of the situation unfolding around them. Jake watched Tyler's behavior with growing concern. "I think we need to get down there soon," he said quietly. "Whatever's happening, it's affecting your son, and that animal doesn't have much time left. But Emma, I need you to understand. Once we start digging into this, we might uncover things that some people don't want exposed." Emma looked at her crying son, then at Jake's serious expression, and made her decision. If there's an animal suffering down there, and if there's something else that needs to be brought to light, then we have to act. But I want to know everything you know before we do anything. Jake nodded grimly. "There's one more thing. That man who approached you and Mrs. Henderson last night, Mark Caldwell, I've seen him before. He's been asking questions around the neighborhood for the past 2 weeks, particularly about the storm drain system and whether anyone had noticed anything unusual." Emma felt the last piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "He knew about this before we discovered it." Jake's expression was grim. "I think Mark Caldwell knows exactly what's down there, and I think he's been waiting for someone else to find it. The question is why he can't retrieve it himself, and what happens when we do." By afternoon, the rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy with moisture and unspoken tension. Emma had arranged for her mother to watch Tyler while she and Jake investigated the storm drain. Sarah had been reluctant to let Emma get involved in what was becoming an increasingly complex situation, but Tyler's continued distress had convinced her that action was necessary. Jake arrived at Emma's house carrying a canvas bag filled with equipment. Flashlights, rope, work gloves, and what looked like professional climbing gear. His serious expression and methodical preparations made Emma realize just how dangerous their venture might be. "Before we do this," Jake said, setting his bag down in Emma's living room, "I need to tell you something else I discovered last night. I did some research on Mark Caldwell, and there's no record of him renting any house on Oak Street. In fact, there's no record of him living in Millbrook at all." Emma felt her stomach tighten. "So who is he, and why is he here?" "That's what we need to find out. But Emma, I want you to understand, if my suspicions are correct, we're not just rescuing an animal, we're uncovering something that someone has gone to great lengths to hide, and that could put us in danger." Emma thought about Tyler's continued distress, about the weak whimpering she had heard from beneath the street, and about the children's toys Jake had described. Whatever was happening here involved innocent creatures, both animal and possibly human, and she couldn't stand by while they suffered. "I understand the risks," Emma said firmly, "but we can't wait any longer." They walked to Elm Street in silence, both lost in their own thoughts about what they might discover. The neighborhood seemed unusually quiet for a Saturday afternoon, with fewer people visible than normal. Emma noticed several neighbors watching from their windows as she and Jake approached the storm drain, and she wondered how many of them knew more about the situation than they were admitting. Jake knelt beside the grate and began examining it with the methodical attention of someone trained to spot details others might miss. Up close, the scratches he had mentioned were clearly visible, fresh marks in the metal that suggested recent tampering. "This grate has definitely been removed and replaced recently," Jake confirmed. "See these scratches here? They're from a crowbar or similar tool. Someone with experience did this, someone who knew what they were doing." He pulled a specialized tool from his bag and began working on the heavy iron cover. It took nearly 10 minutes of careful maneuvering, but eventually the grate came free, revealing a dark opening that descended into the earth below. The smell that rose from the opening was immediately apparent: damp concrete, stagnant water, and something else that made Emma's nose wrinkle. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, but it was organic and suggested the presence of living things in the darkness below. Jake lowered a powerful flashlight into the opening, revealing a concrete-lined chamber about 8 feet deep. The space was larger than Emma had expected, with what appeared to be tunnels leading off in 2 directions. And there, huddled in the far corner of the chamber, was a German shepherd dog. The animal was clearly in distress. Its coat was matted and dirty, and it appeared to be suffering from dehydration and exhaustion. But what struck Emma most forcefully was the way the dog looked at them, not with the desperate gratitude she would have expected from a trapped animal, but with a wary intelligence that suggested it was evaluating their intentions. "Oh my God," Emma whispered. "How long has it been down there?" Jake was studying the scene below with growing concern. "Emma, look at this. The dog isn't alone." Emma followed his gaze and gasped. Scattered around the chamber were more children's toys, not just the few that had been visible near the grate, but dozens of them. Stuffed animals, building blocks, toy cars, and what appeared to be a child's backpack. All of them looked as if they had been carefully placed rather than accidentally dropped. "This isn't random," Jake said quietly. "Someone arranged this scene deliberately. The question is why?" As if responding to their voices, the German shepherd began to make soft, whimpering sounds. Not the desperate cries of a trapped animal, but something that sounded almost like communication. Emma realized with a shock that the dog was trying to tell them something. "Jake," Emma said urgently, "I think the dog knows something about those toys. Look at the way it's positioned itself. It's not trying to get away from them. It's protecting them." Jake nodded grimly. "I think you're right, and I think I know what this is about. Emma, those toys aren't just random objects. They're evidence. Evidence of what?" Jake was already rigging his climbing rope to lower himself into the chamber. "I think someone has been using this tunnel system to hide things they didn't want found. And I think that dog has been guarding those items, waiting for someone to discover them." As Jake descended into the darkness, Emma kept watch above, her mind racing with implications she barely wanted to consider. If the toys were evidence of something criminal, then whoever had hidden them might be desperate to keep them concealed. And if Mark Caldwell was connected to the situation, then he might already know that she and Jake were down here. Her fears were confirmed when she heard footsteps approaching on the sidewalk behind her. She turned to see Mark Caldwell walking toward her with purposeful strides, his earlier friendly demeanor replaced by something much more threatening. "Mrs. Mitchell," Mark called out, his voice carrying a note of barely controlled urgency, "I really think you should step away from that storm drain. This situation is more dangerous than you realize." Emma positioned herself protectively over the opening where Jake was working below. "Mr. Caldwell, I think you need to explain what you're really doing in our neighborhood and what you know about." "What's down there?" Mark stopped about 10 feet away from her, his hands visible but tense. "You don't understand the complexity of this situation. That animal down there isn't just a stray dog. It belongs to someone, and there are people looking for it who won't be happy to find out you've been interfering." Emma felt a chill of fear, but also a growing anger. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm trying to protect you," Mark replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "There are aspects of this situation that involve people you don't want to cross. The best thing you can do is replace that grate and walk away." From below, Emma heard Jake's voice calling up to her. "Emma, you need to see this. There's something down here that changes everything." Mark's expression darkened. "Tell your friend to come back up. Now." Emma made a split-second decision that would alter the course of everything that followed. Instead of backing down, she called down to Jake, "Whatever you found, document it, take pictures, and hurry." Mark lunged toward the storm drain opening, but Emma was ready for him. Her medical training had included self-defense courses, and she managed to block his advance long enough to shout a warning to Jake below. The confrontation was brief but intense. Mark clearly didn't want to physically harm Emma, but he was desperate to prevent her from discovering whatever Jake had found in the tunnels. The struggle ended when Mrs. Henderson appeared around the corner, followed by 2 other neighbors who had been alerted by the shouting. Margaret Henderson might have been In her 70s, but she was still formidable when aroused to action. What exactly is going on here? She demanded, her voice carrying the authority of decades spent managing unruly teenagers. Mark released Emma and stepped back, realizing that the situation had become too public for him to control. His careful plans, whatever they had been, were unraveling in front of multiple witnesses. From below, Jake's voice rose again, filled with excitement and horror. "Emma, call the police! Right now, what I've found down here, this isn't about a lost dog. This is about missing children." The word "missing children" hung in the air like a thunderclap, causing everyone present to freeze in shock. Emma felt her knees go weak as the full implications of Jake's discovery began to sink in. Mrs. Henderson's face went pale, and even Mark Caldwell seemed stunned by the announcement. But it was Mark's reaction that surprised Emma most. Instead of trying to flee or continue his aggressive behavior, he suddenly collapsed onto the curb, burying his face in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with tears and an anguish that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. "I've been trying to find them for 6 months, Mark said, his voice breaking. "My daughter Sophia and her best friend Lily. They disappeared from a park in Columbus while they were staying with my ex-wife. The police gave up after 3 months, said they had probably run away, but I knew that wasn't true. Sophia would never just disappear without telling me." Emma stared at him in shock. "You're the father of one of the missing children." Mark nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Sophia is 8 years old. She has blonde hair and blue eyes, and she's terrified of storms, but loves animals more than anything in the world. Lily is her best friend from school. They're inseparable." When the official investigation stalled, I hired a private detective who traced their last known movements to this area. Mrs. Henderson's expression had softened from suspicion to sympathy. "And you think they're down there? In those tunnels?" Mark shook his head quickly. "Not now, but I think they were brought here at some point. The detective found evidence that someone had been using this tunnel system as a temporary hiding place. The children's belongings we've found, some of them belong to Sophia and Lily." From below, Jake called up again, "I'm coming back up. Everyone needs to hear this." Jake emerged from the storm drain, carrying a small waterproof container and looking shaken by whatever he had discovered below. His face was grim as he set the container down and opened it to reveal its contents. Inside were several items that made Emma's heart race: a child's purple hairband, a small notebook with drawings and writing, and most significantly, a cell phone that appeared to be in working condition despite its time underground. This phone belonged to one of the children, Jake explained. It was hidden in a cavity in the tunnel wall, wrapped in plastic, like someone wanted to make sure it would be preserved. And there's something else. The German Shepherd down there has been trained. This isn't a stray dog that accidentally got trapped. Someone put it there deliberately to guard these items. Mark's face lit up with desperate hope. "That's Rex. He's Sophia's dog. She's been training him since he was a puppy. If Rex is here, then Sophia and Lily were definitely brought to this location." Emma felt her medical training kick in as she tried to process the emotional trauma everyone was experiencing. But who would take the children? And why would they hide evidence here only to have it guarded by their own dog? Mark's expression grew dark again. "My ex-wife's boyfriend, David Mitchell. He has a history of inappropriate behavior with children. When Sophia started telling me she was uncomfortable around him, I tried to get custody modified, but the courts move slowly. A week later, both girls disappeared." Jake was examining the phone carefully. "This is password protected, but it might contain information about what happened to them. We need to get this to the police immediately." But Mrs. Henderson raised a practical concern that stopped everyone short. If this David character is involved, and if he knows about this hiding place, won't he have moved the children somewhere else by now? It's been 6 months. Mark's face crumpled again. That's what I'm afraid of, but this evidence might be the key to finding out where they went. The detective thinks David has been moving them around, staying ahead of the investigation. But if we can prove he was here, we might be able to trace his other activities. Emma found herself looking at Mark with new eyes. His desperate behavior, his attempts to discourage their investigation, it all made sense now. He hadn't been trying to hide evidence. He had been trying to protect it while he figured out how to use it safely. "Why didn't you just tell us the truth from the beginning?" Emma asked. Mark's laugh was bitter. "Would you have believed me? A stranger shows up in your neighborhood claiming that children were hidden in your storm drains? You would have called the police on me, and David would have had time to destroy any remaining evidence." Jake was still studying the items they had recovered. "There's something else down there that might be important. Rex has been living off of food and water that someone has been providing regularly. The containers are too clean and too fresh for him to have been abandoned 6 months ago." Emma felt a chill of realization. Someone is still taking care of him. Someone who knows he's down there. Mark's eyes widened with understanding. "David, he's been coming back to check on the evidence, maybe to move it or destroy it. But he couldn't take Rex because Sophia trained him only to respond to family members. The dog wouldn't go with him." Mrs. Henderson, despite her initial skepticism, was now fully engaged in solving the puzzle. So Rex has been protecting the evidence and waiting for someone Sophia would trust to find him. Jake nodded grimly, and Tyler has been responding to Rex because children are more sensitive to emotional distress than adults. That baby knew something was wrong long before we figured it out. Emma thought about her son's behavior over the past few days. His agitation near the storm drain, his pointing and crying, his unusual attachment to the location. Tyler had been trying to help them understand that someone needed rescue. "We need to call the police now," Emma said firmly, "but we also need to get Rex out of there safely. If David has been coming back regularly, he might return at any time." Mark stood up, his earlier desperation replaced by renewed determination. "I have contacts in the FBI who have been working on missing children cases. If we can get this evidence to them along with Rex, they might be able to track David's movements and find Sophia and Lily." As if summoned by their conversation, they heard the sound of a car engine approaching. Everyone turned to see a dark sedan pulling up to the curb slowly, almost deliberately. The driver was a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a beard, and even from a distance his presence felt threatening. "That's him," Mark whispered, his voice filled with rage and fear. "That's David Mitchell." The car stopped about 50 feet away, and the man inside seemed to be evaluating the situation. He could clearly see the open storm drain, the group of people gathered around it, and the equipment Jake had brought. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he put the car in reverse and began to back away. Jake was already on his phone, calling 911 and reading off the license plate number as the sedan disappeared around the corner. But Emma knew that David's appearance, however brief, had changed everything. He now knew that his hiding place had been discovered, and he would likely destroy any remaining evidence or, worse, harm the children if he hadn't already. Mark was visibly shaking with emotion. "After 6 months of searching, I finally have proof that David took them, but now he knows we're onto him. What if this makes things worse for Sophia and Lily?" Emma put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We can't think that way. We have evidence now, and we have law enforcement resources that weren't available before. Most importantly, we have Rex, and dogs like him can track scents and locations that humans can't. Mrs. Henderson, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange, spoke up with the wisdom of her years. "Young man, you've been carrying this burden alone for 6 months. Now you have a community helping you, law enforcement taking you seriously, and evidence that proves your instincts were right. That's more hope than you had yesterday." As police sirens began to wail in the distance, Rex's barking echoed from the tunnels below, not the desperate cries of a trapped animal, but the triumphant calls of a loyal guardian whose vigil was finally ending. Within 20 minutes, Elm Street had been transformed into a command center. Police cars, an FBI, mobile unit and animal rescue vehicles lined the quiet residential street, drawing curious neighbors from their homes. Emma watched in amazement as her sleepy neighborhood became the focal point of a major investigation that could finally bring 2 missing children home. Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI's Missing Children Division took charge of the scene with professional efficiency. She was a woman in her 40s, with graying hair and the kind of steady presence that inspired confidence in crisis situations. After listening to Mark's story and examining the evidence Jake had recovered, she confirmed what everyone hoped to hear. "Mr. Caldwell," Agent Collins said, placing a reassuring hand on Mark's shoulder, "the evidence you've provided gives us more concrete leads than we've had in the entire 6 months since Sophia and Lily disappeared. The phone alone could contain GPS data, text messages, and photos that might tell us exactly where they were taken." Jake had successfully brought Rex up from the tunnels, and the German Shepherd's reunion with Mark was emotionally overwhelming for everyone who witnessed it. The dog, despite his ordeal, immediately recognized Mark and began displaying behaviors that the FBI's canine specialist found significant. "Rex keeps looking in a specific direction," Dr. Patricia Williams, the canine behavior expert, explained to the assembled group. "Dogs have incredible sensory memories, and his body language suggests he recognizes scent trails in this area. He's not just happy to see Mr. Caldwell, he's trying to tell us something about where he's been." Emma had brought Tyler to the scene, partly because she couldn't find a babysitter on short notice, but mostly because her son's unusual sensitivity to the situation had proven valuable. Tyler's behavior around Rex was remarkable. The baby seemed completely calm for the first time in days, reaching out to touch the dog's fur and making soft, comforting sounds. Agent Collins noticed Tyler's interaction with Rex immediately. "Children often have insights that adults miss," she said to Emma. "Has your son shown any other unusual behaviors lately that might be relevant?" Emma thought back over the past few days. "He's been very focused on this area of the neighborhood, pointing and getting upset whenever we walked past the storm drain. But there's something else. He's been waking up at night around 2 a.m. and looking out his bedroom window toward Elm Street." Dr. Williams exchanged a meaningful look with Agent Collins. "Mr. Caldwell, what time did David typically visit this location, if our theory is correct?" Mark consulted notes he had been keeping throughout his private investigation. The detective's surveillance suggested activity here between 1 and 3 a.m. on nights when there was minimal street traffic. He would park on Oak Street and walk over. "Agent," Collins nodded grimly, "your son may have been sensing David's presence during his visits to check on the evidence. Children's sleep patterns often respond to environmental threats that adults don't consciously notice. The technical team was working on Sophia's phone, and their preliminary findings were encouraging. The device contained GPS data, photos, and text messages that painted a picture of the girl's last known movements. More importantly, the phone's cloud backup had continued to sync data even while it was hidden in the tunnels, providing a digital trail that investigators could follow. "We have locations," Agent Collins announced after consulting with the technical team. The phone data shows movement patterns between 3 different sites over the past 6 months. 2 of them are within 50 miles of here. Mark's face lit up with hope for the first time in months. Does that mean you know where they are? Now, Agent Collins was cautious but optimistic. We have strong leads. We're coordinating with local law enforcement at each location to conduct simultaneous searches. The goal is to prevent David from moving them again if he realizes we're closing in. Mrs. Henderson, who had been quietly observing the professional activity around her neighborhood, approached Agent Collins with a practical concern. Agent, what can we as a community do to help? We all feel invested in this situation now, and we want to support Mr. Caldwell and the search for those children. Agent Collins smiled, the first genuine warmth she had shown since arriving. Community support is often the key to successful outcomes in cases like this. Mr. Caldwell has been carrying this burden alone for too long. Having neighbors who care enough to get involved makes a tremendous difference. Jake had been working with the FBI's technical team to map the tunnel system beneath the neighborhood. His knowledge of the underground infrastructure had proven invaluable in understanding how David had been able to move through the area without being detected. Agent Collins, Jake, said, pointing to the tunnel diagrams they had created, there are access points to this system from at least 6 different locations in the neighborhood. If David was using these tunnels regularly, other residents might have noticed unusual activity without realizing what they were seeing. Emma had an idea. What if we organized a neighborhood meeting tonight? We could ask everyone to share anything unusual they might have noticed over the past 6 months. Things that seemed insignificant at the time might be important now. Mark looked overwhelmed by the support he was receiving from people who had been strangers just hours before. I don't know how to thank you all, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For 6 months, I felt like I was fighting this battle alone. Having a community that cares enough to help, it means everything. Tyler chose that moment to reach out, from Emma's arms toward Mark, making the soft babbling sounds that meant he wanted to be held. Mark took the baby gently, and Tyler immediately calmed, as if sensing that Mark needed comfort as much as Rex had needed rescue. Dr. Williams observed, this interaction with professional interest. Children often serve as emotional barometers in traumatic situations, she explained. Tyler's behavior suggests that the emotional tension surrounding this case is beginning to resolve. That's often a positive sign that we're moving toward a successful outcome. Agent Collins received a call on her secure phone and stepped away to take it privately. When she returned, her expression was carefully controlled, but Emma caught a hint of excitement in her eyes. We have developments at 2 of the locations identified by the phone data, Agent Collins announced. Local teams have confirmed evidence of recent activity at both sites. We're moving to coordinate response teams now. Mark's hands began to shake. Have you found them? Agent Collins chose her words carefully. We have strong reasons for optimism, but I can't give you details until our teams have completed their work. What I can tell you is that Rex's presence here, the evidence you preserved, and the community support you've received have all contributed to making this breakthrough possible. The FBI team began packing their equipment, preparing to coordinate the search operations from their field office. But before they left, Agent Collins had one more conversation with the neighborhood group that had gathered around the storm drain. I want all of you to understand something important, she said. What happened here today? Neighbors caring enough to investigate, taking risks to help someone in need, supporting a father's desperate search for his children. This is how communities are supposed to work. This is how we protect each other and solve problems that seem impossible. Emma looked around at the faces of her neighbors. Mrs. Henderson with her newfound respect for individual initiative, Jake with his willingness to use his skills for others, Mark with his renewed hope after months of despair. Even Tyler seemed to sense the importance of the moment, babbling contentedly in Mark's arms while Rex sat loyally beside them. As the FBI vehicles pulled away and the street began to return to normal, Emma realized that Elm Street would never be quite the same. They had all been changed by their shared experience of uncovering truth, supporting each other and working together toward a common goal. Mrs. Henderson expressed what everyone was feeling. Whatever happens next, we've proven that ordinary people can make a difference when they decide to care about each other. That's a lesson this neighborhood needed to learn. The storm drain grate had been secured by the FBI team, but flowers were already beginning to appear around its edges, placed there by neighbors who wanted to mark the spot where hope had been rediscovered and community had been reborn. Tyler reached down from Mark's arms to touch one of the flowers, then looked up at the adults around him with the satisfied expression of someone whose important work had finally been completed. 3 days later, Emma was awakened at dawn by the sound of cars pulling into her driveway. Through her bedroom window, she could see Mark's pickup truck, followed by Agent Collins's FBI vehicle, and behind them, a car she didn't recognize. Her heart began to race as she realized this could only mean one thing. There was news about Sophia and Lily. She quickly dressed and went outside, finding Mark standing beside his truck with an expression of barely contained emotion. But it wasn't despair she saw in his face. It was joy so profound it seemed to radiate from him like sunlight. Agent Collins approached Emma with a smile that transformed her usually serious features. "Ms. Mitchell," she said warmly, "I wanted you and your neighbors to be among the first to know. We found them. Sophia and Lily are safe and they're coming home." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes as the relief washed over her. The past 3 days had been an agony of waiting, hoping, and trying to support Mark while the FBI conducted their search operations. The entire neighborhood had been on edge, checking news reports and social media for any updates. Mark stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "I wanted to thank you personally, Emma. If you hadn't heard Rex that morning, if you hadn't been brave enough to investigate, if you hadn't brought Jake and the whole neighborhood together, my little girl might never have come home." Before Emma could respond, the back door of the unfamiliar car opened and 2 small figures emerged. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she saw them. Sophia, a blonde 8-year-old with bright blue eyes that were unmistakably her father's, and Lily, a brunette girl of the same age who stayed close to her friend's side. Both children looked thin and tired, but they were alert and responsive, showing no signs of serious harm. Rex, who had been staying with Mark for the past 3 days, let out a joyful bark and bounded towards Sophia. The reunion between the girl and her dog was everything Emma had hoped it would be. Pure, unrestrained love and relief that brought tears to everyone watching. "Daddy!" Sophia cried, running into Mark's arms while Rex danced around them both. "I knew you would find us. I told Lily you would never stop looking." Mark held his daughter as if he would never let her go again, tears streaming down his face. "I promised. I would find you, sweetheart. I'm sorry it took so long." Agent Collins explained to Emma what had happened during the 3-day search operation. "The phone data led us to a remote cabin about 40 miles from here, where David had been keeping them. He'd been moving them periodically to stay ahead of the investigation, but Rex's evidence trail helped us piece together his pattern of behavior. When we closed in, David abandoned the location and fled, but the girls were unharmed." Emma watched as Sophia interacted with her father and Rex, marveling at the resilience children showed in recovery from trauma. The little girl seemed remarkably well-adjusted considering her ordeal, and her first concern was for her friend Lily, who was being reunited with her own parents. Tyler, who Emma had brought outside when she heard the commotion, began making excited babbling sounds when he saw Sophia. The 8-year-old noticed him immediately and approached with the gentle manner of someone who loved babies. "Is this the baby who helped find us?" Sophia asked Emma. "Daddy told me that a little boy could sense that Rex needed help." Emma nodded, amazed by Sophia's intuitive understanding. "This is Tyler. He seemed to know something was wrong long before any of the adults figured it out." Sophia knelt down to Tyler's level and spoke to him softly. "Thank you for listening to Rex, Tyler. He was taking care of my special things, and he was waiting for someone to find them so Daddy could bring me home." Tyler reached out to touch Sophia's hand, and for a moment, the baby who had been so agitated for days seemed completely at peace. Emma realized she was witnessing something profound, the completion of a circle of caring that had begun with a child's sensitivity to suffering and ended with healing for everyone involved. Mrs. Henderson appeared from across the street, moving faster than Emma had seen her move in years. She approached the group with tears in her eyes, and her usual no-nonsense manner softened by emotion. "Young lady," Mrs. Henderson said to Sophia, "this entire neighborhood has been worried about you. I hope you know how many people were working to bring you home." Sophia smiled shyly. "Daddy told me that people I don't even know were helping to look for me. That makes me feel really good inside." Jake arrived from his house, carrying a small wrapped package. He approached Sophia hesitantly, clearly moved by seeing her safe, but uncertain about intruding on such a personal moment. "Sophia," he said gently, "I was the one who went down into the tunnels to find Rex and your belongings. I wanted to give you something to celebrate coming home." Sophia unwrapped the package to reveal a small wooden carving of a German shepherd that looked remarkably like Rex. Jake had clearly spent considerable time creating it, and the craftsmanship was beautiful. "I made this while we were waiting for news about you," Jake explained. "I wanted you to have something to remind you that there are always people willing to help when someone needs it." Sophia hugged the carving to her chest, then surprised Jake by hugging him as well. "Thank you for taking care of Rex. He told me later that you were very gentle with him, even though he was scared." Emma found herself thinking about how much had changed in just 1 week. A routine morning walk had led to the discovery of a terrible situation which had brought together a community of neighbors who barely knew each other, which had resulted in the rescue of 2 children and the strengthening of bonds that would last for years to come. Agent Collins gathered everyone's attention for a final announcement. "I want you all to know that David Mitchell has been apprehended and will face charges related to the abduction. More importantly, both girls have been examined by medical professionals and are physically healthy. They'll need some time to readjust, but their prognosis for full recovery is excellent." Mark looked around at the neighbors who had become his extended family over the past week. "I don't know how to adequately thank all of you," he said. "You welcomed a stranger, you listened to his story, you took risks to help him, and you never gave up hope. Sophia and I will be staying in Millbrook permanently now. This is where our real family is." Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Well," she said in her practical voice, "I suppose that means we'll need to organize a proper welcome home party for these girls. And I think it's time this neighborhood started having regular gatherings so we can all stay connected." Emma smiled as she realized Mrs. Henderson was already planning ways to maintain the sense of community they had discovered. Tyler gurgled happily in her arms, seemingly satisfied that his work was complete. As the morning progressed and more neighbors arrived to welcome Sophia and Lily home, Emma reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a baby's sensitivity to suffering and ended with healing for an entire community. She thought about how ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they chose to care about each other, how children often possessed wisdom that adults had forgotten, and how even the darkest situations could be transformed by hope, determination, and the power of people working together. The storm drain on Elm Street had been permanently sealed by the city, but the flowers that neighbors continued to place there served as a reminder of what could be accomplished when a community decided to act with courage and compassion. And every time Emma walked past that corner with Tyler, she remembered that sometimes the most important voices calling for help are the ones that can't speak with words. They speak with the universal language of need, waiting for hearts willing to listen and hands willing to help. Dear neighbors and friends, we hope this story of courage, community, and the unbreakable bonds between families has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. Just as Tyler's innocent sensitivity led to the discovery that saved Sophia and Lily, each of us has the power to notice when someone needs help and the strength to act with compassion. We've prepared a special collection of stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things for each other, stories that celebrate the best of human nature and remind us that heroes live among us every day. You can find these inspiring tales by subscribing to our channel and joining our community of listeners who believe in the power of hope and kindness. If this story moved you, please share it with others who might need a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are always people willing to help. Leave us a comment telling us about a time when your community came together to help someone in need. We love hearing about real-life heroes and the difference they make. Don't forget to like this story and subscribe for more heartwarming content that celebrates the extraordinary power of ordinary people caring for each other. Together, we can create more stories like Sophia and Lily's, stories where love wins, communities unite, and no one has to face their challenges alone.